Hello, and welcome back to the Stories of Northern Life podcast, brought to you by the Sault Ste. Marie Museum. I'm your host, Nicole, and today we are going to be looking at another members newsletter. So in today's episode, we are going to be looking at the members newsletter from March 1990. So if you remember from our last episode on the newsletters, we were looking at January 1990. And now we are skipping over to March. I'm not entirely sure if they did put one out for February, but if they did, I can't seem to find it, so we are just going to be moving on to March. The setup is still pretty much the same as before. We start off with a square sort of advertisement block here, and it is notifying the members of the annual meeting, or as we now call it, the annual general meeting, or AGM. And so it says, Notice of Annual Meeting, Wednesday, March 28th, 7:30 p.m., at the museum. And the agenda consisted of the President's Report, Curator/Administrator's Report, election of the 1990 Board, a social hour, and then finally it finishes off with members and guests welcome. Now, if you remember back from our episode on the January newsletter, it did have a similar block, and it was a call out for board members. And so back in January, everybody would have filled out their forms so that we could hopefully get a bunch of board members interested. And then come March and the AGM, you would be able to elect those people. And the little note at the very bottom of the page reads, Come to the annual meeting and meet the new members of the Museum Management Board. This is an opportunity to share in a review of museum activities over the past year and in plans for 1990. Now we move on to the next page, and you can see it right here. We have another little advertisement that we will be looking at here, and it says, Plan an evening out. Vivian Rhodes has volunteered to coordinate a fundraiser that combines food, entertainment, and a chance to dance. Get together a group or come along on your own to feast on a traditional Italian dinner. Tickets are $20 single, available at the museum office or from management board members. The little text ad says, The museum presents comedy show and dinner dance, Saturday, April 21st, 1990, Knights of Columbus Hall, 251 Northern Ave. Cocktails, 6 p.m., dinner, 7 p.m. Tickets, $20 per person. Tickets, compliments of Anstis Real Estate, Inc. and broker, 565 McNabb. Vivian Rhodes needs volunteers to help sell tickets and on the night of the dance to bartend. And as hostess to make sure that all attending have a good time. Call her to sign up. Then we have Minister of Culture and Communications visits the museum. Christine Hart, Minister of the Ontario Government's Ministry of Culture and Communications, spent part of the afternoon touring the museum on March 22nd as part of the Heritage Week celebrations, before embarking on a behind-the-scenes tour to inspect features of the renovations, which were made possible by a grant of $200,000 from the Ministry's Community Facilities Improvement Plan. Mrs. Hart enjoyed a session with grade 3 students from Sacred Heart School. The students and their teacher, Fern Tagliabracchi, were celebrating the 100th anniversary of their school and the separate school system in Sault Ste. Marie. The children shared stories with the minister, tales of their grandparents, and legends told as part of their family's history. At a reception at the Ramada Inn later that evening, members of the arts and heritage community had a further occasion to celebrate Heritage Week. And now moving on to the third page here that you can see, we are talking about Kathy Hart's baby arrives. So Kathy was hard at work here on her graphics project one day and in hospital the next to deliver her son, Matthew James. Matthew has already been in for a visit. He's a beautiful, contented baby. Congratulations to both Kathy and Jeff and the two sets of proud grandparents. Next, we move on. Patterns from Algoma Steel became part of the collection. This is a shop drawing from one of a series of wooden patterns donated to the collection by Algoma Steel Corporation. These patterns were used to form molds for the casting of metal parts and represent a direct link to the early industrial heritage of the Lake Superior Corporation. The equipment fashioned from the parts is now obsolete, and much of it no longer exists. We are fortunate to have photographs in the collection that depict the early equipment in use. These photographs will combine with the patterns to form the nucleus of the industrial development section of the permanent exhibit in the Skylight Gallery. The education collection has also benefited from Algoma Steel's generosity, as patterns have also been made available for installation in the Discovery Gallery. And then at the bottom of the page, you can see that there is a little sort of drawing sketch here, and it says slide frame SC. One required pattern number, and then a few more little details. So if you are watching on audio, if you are watching on video, you can see the image here. And so this is one of the little sketches that we were able to get from Algoma Steel. Then on the last page here, we move on to Artifact of the Month. So although they do not depict the actual artifact, they have an ad from when it was being sold. And it says, we now have an economical steam cooker, just like this one, which was pictured in the 1908 Sears Roebuck catalog. It was one of the items donated recently by Ruby Evans. And so this little ad here that they included says, economical steam cooker, $4.87. At this reduced price, your savings is greater than ever. Can you afford to do without an economical cooker when it saves 3 times its cost in fuel alone during the year? You can cook onions, cabbage, potatoes, and pudding. And then it just goes on to sort of describe a little bit more the cooker and things like that. So you can see, once again, if you're watching on video, the little ad that they included there about the steam cooker. And last but not least, they finish up with the exhibit schedule for spring 1990 onwards. So first here, they give a little blurb that says, work continues on installation of Superior's Windward Shore, the history of Algoma District in the Skylight Gallery. The gallery is now open to the public and should have its entire display in place by late spring. So our first exhibit runs from May 30th to July 11th. Behind the exhibit box, the National Archives and Elections Canada has chosen our museum as the site to premiere their new exhibit, which looks at the history of the electoral process in Canada. That seems like a pretty big honor that we had for the National Archives and Elections Canada to choose our museum for that. So that sounded quite exciting. Then we have July 24th to October 24th, The Wonder of Wood, A traveling exhibit produced by the Manitoba Museum of Man will help celebrate the Sioux's designation as Forestry Capital of Canada 1990. Then we have October 12th to November 5th, Discovery of the Titanic. A Royal Ontario Museum traveling exhibit complete with videos taken by the underwater submarine which explored the wreck. And then, month of November, quilts and needlework. Creations entered in Forestry Capital of Canada's quilt and needlework contest will be on display along with historic quilts from the community. And so, out of those 4 exhibits, 3 of them were actually traveling exhibits. And now, we don't really have as many traveling exhibits here, at least at our museum, because if you've ever been to places like the ROM or the Canadian Museum of History, things like that, those larger institutions, they have their traveling exhibits. And if you've been able to go in and see them, they're just so large and grand and everything like that. So not only do they need a lot of space, which we don't necessarily have available for those exhibits, we might be able to have smaller ones or maybe parts of that exhibit, but they also cost so much money. And I feel that in the past, although I'm not sure exactly how costly these traveling exhibits were, I feel that they were a lot more affordable for museums like ourselves, these smaller community museums, and that's why we were able to have so many of them. And perhaps maybe in the past there were a lot more traveling exhibits because there wasn't as many rules and regulations and insurance and everything that surrounded it, so it made it a little bit cheaper and just easier for people to set up traveling exhibits. But it's interesting to go back and see and look at these exhibit schedules especially and see how many traveling exhibits we did have back then, how many we were able to have here. We did have a traveling exhibit here, I want to say 2 years ago, and it was on Francophone history in Canada, and it was here for the month of June, so we were able to have that set up. That was really lovely to have, and other than that, there hasn't been a lot of other traveling exhibits that we've really been able to have just due to the financial barriers and sort of the space requirements. And so it'll be interesting to see as we continue on with this series what other traveling exhibits we might come across that were held here at the Sioux Museum. Do you remember any of these traveling exhibits that were here behind the ballot box, the Wonder of Wood, the Discovery of the Titanic, or did you even take part in the quilts and needlework exhibit? And so I hope you have enjoyed this episode. This is looking back at the March newsletter for 1990 once again. And as always, thanks for listening. Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, you might like our blog too. Head over to our website, Sioux Museum, that's SAULT museum.ca, and look under Discover. You will find our blog, Museum Musings. We share short synopsis of influential people, historic places, and impactful events in our history. Pictures are always included, and you will be sure to learn a little something new with each post.